The warehouse was always loud in the evenings. Machines hummed, carts rolled over the concrete floor, and tired workers moved from one corner to the other, trying to finish their shifts without slowing down. Among them was a young woman who had already been on her feet for more than 12 hours. She kept her head down, moving quietly and quickly, hoping to finish her tasks before midnight. She had been doing double shifts almost every day for the past month, and though her body felt weak, she pushed herself because she had no other choice. The CEO of the company visited the warehouse floor every week. Most of the workers did not expect him to show up, but he liked seeing the place with his own eyes. He believed that real problems could only be understood when he watched the people doing the actual work. That evening he had come earlier than usual. Walking through the aisles while supervisors explained what needed improvement, he noticed her almost immediately. She moved with a kind of urgency that looked painful yet determined. Her uniform was neatly washed, but clearly worn out. Her shoes looked old, the soles flattening from long shifts. She never looked up, never complained, and never took breaks unless she absolutely had to. He watched as she lifted boxes with careful movements, her hands shaking slightly from exhaustion. Later that night, when his rounds were nearly done, he saw her standing near the doorway of the main office, hesitating as if she wanted to speak, but wasn't sure if she should. She stood there for a few seconds, then slowly walked forward. "Excuse me," she said softly, almost whispering, as if afraid of being a bother. The CEO turned toward her. "Yes, how can I help you?" She pressed her lips together nervously, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. I wanted to ask something. Only if it's okay," of course, he replied gently. "Go ahead." She took a small breath before speaking. "I was wondering if there are any leftover meals from the cafeteria. Anything at all? Sometimes they have extra at the end of the night. I work both shifts and I just thought maybe I could take some home instead of it being thrown away." The CEO paused. It wasn't a strange request on the surface. Many workers sometimes asked about surplus food, but there was something different about the way she said it. Not bold, not casual. More like she felt guilty for even asking. As if she had thought about it for days before building the courage to approach him, he nodded. "Let me check for you." Relief washed over her face instantly, but it was a sad kind of relief. The kind that made him feel that she wasn't asking for convenience, she was asking out of real need. She thanked him softly and stepped back, standing near the wall as if she didn't want to disturb anyone. She looked so tired that even her posture seemed heavy. He walked toward the cafeteria storage and asked one of the staff members if any meals were left. They found 2 meal boxes, simple dishes. Nothing big, but still fresh. When he returned and handed them to her, she looked at them as if they were something precious. "Thank you so much," she said quietly. "I really appreciate it." "You're welcome," he replied. "Do you have a long trip home?" She nodded, adjusting her bag again. "It takes a while, but it's fine. I'm used to it." He wanted to ask more, but something told him she wasn't ready to share. She bowed her head slightly and hurried off toward the locker area. He watched her for a moment, wondering why someone working double shifts needed to ask for leftover food. The company paid fair wages. Workers who took overtime earned even more. It didn't add up, but she didn't look like someone who wasted her money. She looked like someone carrying a heavy load she didn't talk about. Later, while the CEO wrapped up a meeting with supervisors, he happened to catch a glimpse of her again. She wasn't heading to the employee parking lot like others. Instead, she walked past it, holding the small meal bag close to her chest. She walked briskly toward the bus stop outside the facility. It surprised him. Most people working double shifts either had cars or carpooled because of the odd hours. Taking the bus that late could be dangerous. He stepped closer to the window, watching her stand alone under the dim streetlight. The night wind was cold, and she hugged her arms tightly around herself. A bus finally arrived, and she stepped in. For a moment, he considered letting it go. Maybe she lived nearby. Maybe things weren't as bad as they seemed, but something inside him wouldn't settle. He had seen workers exhausted before, but not like her. He had seen people ask for extra meals before, but not with that level of quiet desperation. She had the look of someone who carried more responsibilities than her age should allow. Before thinking too much about it, he walked outside, got into his car, and told his driver to follow the bus at a safe distance. He didn't want to scare her. He just needed to understand. Maybe there was a welfare issue his company had overlooked. Maybe she was dealing with something serious and too afraid to speak up. The bus drove through the city, passing bright streets first, then older neighborhoods with cracked sidewalks and flickering lights. After about 20 minutes, the bus stopped near a narrow street lined with old buildings. She stepped off, pulling her bag close. Instead of turning toward the nicer side of the road, she walked deeper into the worn-down area. The CEO felt a pinch in his chest. The place didn't look safe at all, especially for someone finishing a shift at midnight. He told the driver to slow down, but not get too close. He watched her walk past closed shops and dark alleys. The farther she walked, the more uneasy he felt. She kept looking over her shoulder, then quickened her pace as if she was familiar with the dangers around her. Finally, just stopped in front of a small building with peeling paint and rusted railings. The windows were dark. The hallway light inside blinked weakly every few seconds. She unlocked the front door and disappeared inside. The CEO stayed outside for a few minutes, staring at the building. He had expected a modest home, maybe small, but safe. Not this place that looked like it barely passed inspection. He felt bothered. Deeply, something wasn't right inside the building. A faint glow appeared behind one of the second-floor windows. Then, a quick shadow moved. A muffled voice, maybe a child, echoed faintly. He leaned back in his seat. Children? Did she live with kids? He didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the signs were clear. She was working double shifts, not for herself. The leftover food wasn't for her either. He had seen enough for the night. He didn't want to invade her privacy further. He just wanted to understand her circumstances so he could help her properly. But now he knew something for sure. She wasn't struggling alone. Someone, maybe more than one person, was counting on her as the car pulled away. He thought about how she looked at the meal boxes, how she thanked him, how her eyes held a mix of fatigue and fear. It bothered him long after he reached his home. He barely slept that night, wondering what her real story was. The next day, arrived at work earlier than usual, still thinking about her. He watched the workers enter the building one by one. When she finally walked in, she moved slowly, as if her legs were still heavy from the night before. She tried to hide a yawn and adjusted her small backpack. She didn't notice him watching. He saw the same shoes, same tired eyes, the same quiet determination. She had been up late again, probably taking care of someone. And now she was here, ready to work another long day. "Good morning," he said as he passed near her station. She looked surprised. He spoke to her again. "Good morning, sir. You work double shifts often?" he asked casually. She nodded but didn't look into his eyes. "Only when I can. I like keeping busy." It was the kind of answer someone gives when they don't want to reveal the truth. He didn't press. He didn't want her to feel cornered, but he also knew he couldn't ignore what he saw last night. Throughout the day, he kept an eye on her quietly. She never stopped working. She never asked for more breaks. She barely spoke to anyone. It was like she was carrying something heavy on her shoulders and didn't want anyone to see it. By the time her second shift began, looked even more exhausted, but she kept going. A supervisor walked past and told her she could take a break if needed, but she simply smiled politely and said she was fine. Her hands were trembling slightly. Her steps had slowed, but she didn't stop. When the night shift finally ended, she picked up her bag and headed toward the exit. Once again, she walked toward the bus stop. Once again, the CEO felt that same concern pulling at him. He followed her agenda quietly, respectfully. But this time, he knew he had to do more than just watch. Something was deeply wrong, and he couldn't stay silent. He didn't know what he would find when he reached her home again. He didn't know who was waiting for her behind those dimly lit windows. But he knew this. She needed help. Even if she wasn't asking for it, and he wasn't going to turn away. The night felt colder than the one before. Even the wind seemed sharper as it moved through the empty streets outside the factory. When the young woman stepped out of the main gate, she held her thin jacket close to her body and looked around. as if checking whether she had enough time to catch the next bus. She walked quickly, almost jogging, even though her steps were clearly tired. The CEO stood near his car again, watching from a distance. He did not want her to feel followed or uncomfortable, but he also couldn't ignore the questions that had kept him awake. Why was she working 2 shifts every day? Why did she need leftover food? Why was she living in a building that looked unsafe for anyone, let alone someone who came home late at night? He had seen enough in life to know when a person was struggling silently. She was one of them. He stepped into the car, and his driver waited for instructions. Same as yesterday, the CEO said quietly. Keep a distance, no closer than yesterday. The driver nodded. He had worked with the CEO long enough to understand without needing a full explanation. He started the engine and slowly drove behind the bus once she boarded it. Inside the bus, she sat near the window, resting her head against the glass. The faint glow of passing streetlights brushed across her face. Her eyes slowly closed for a moment, then opened again, as if she wanted to sleep but couldn't allow herself to. She clutched her small bag tightly, the same bag she carried every day. It didn't look full enough to hold much. Be a few papers, maybe something personal. Nothing more. The CEO watched her through the bus window as the vehicle turned. He couldn't hear her, but he could see the heaviness in her movements. She had the quiet sadness of someone who had been carrying too much for far too long. Watching her struggle felt wrong. He wondered how many people like her existed in his company, hiding their pain behind polite smiles and quiet voices. The bus drove for several minutes before turning toward the older part of the city again. Once more, she stepped off at the same stop, clutching the meal box he had given her earlier. She didn't waste time. She moved quickly, her footsteps echoing on the cracked pavement. The CEO followed at a cautious distance. She walked to the same building as before. Her keys slid into the lock with shaky hands. When she pushed the door open, he saw the same faint light flicker from inside, before the door fully closed behind her. A tiny voice from inside called out, "You're back." He heard that. The voice wasn't loud, but it carried a mix of relief and excitement. Another small voice followed, "Did you bring anything?" The door closed, blocking the rest of the words, but the CEO felt something inside him tighten. Those voices were not from adults. They were children, young children, hungry waiting children. He leaned back in his seat and let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. The picture was becoming clearer. She wasn't living for herself. She was caring for kids. Maybe siblings, maybe family members, but definitely kids who needed her desperately. For a moment, he imagined what her nights must look like. Coming home from a long shift, giving the children food before eating herself, checking their homework, making sure they slept safely, then waking up before dawn to go back to work. It was the kind of routine that broke a person slowly. He didn't want to invade her privacy by standing outside her building again, so he told the driver to head back. But the image of the little voices calling for her stayed in his mind the entire ride home. By the time he got into bed, he already knew he couldn't forget what he had seen. Some problems could be ignored, but not this one. It's not when someone under his company was carrying such a heavy burden alone. The next morning, he arrived at work earlier than usual. The sun had barely risen, and the warehouse crew was just starting their day. Workers walked in with tired but ready expressions. Conversations drifted across the entrance. Some laughed about a joke from last night. Others chatted about their families. But she walked alone, calm and quiet. Carrying the same small bag, she greeted the security guard with a small nod, the same polite gesture she gave everyone. Then she rushed inside to clock in. She never wasted a second. The CEO watched her closely from his office window. She looked even more exhausted today. The shadows under her eyes were darker and her steps were slower. A supervisor approached her, probably to go over the day's tasks. Even from afar, the CEO could see her replying with kindness, her shoulders slightly bent from fatigue, but her attitude still gentle. She didn't complain, didn't show frustration, didn't even hint at the stress he knew she was under later in the morning. He walked onto the warehouse floor again, pretending to do his usual inspection. She was stacking boxes when he approached. She looked up, a little surprised to see him. "How are you feeling today?" he asked casually. I'm okay, she replied quickly, almost too quickly, just a bit tired. Double shifts again? She nodded. Yes, but it's fine. I'll manage. There it was, again that sentence. I'll manage. People said that when they had no choice, when they had to be strong, even if they were breaking. He wanted to ask her why she pushed herself so hard, but her guarded tone stopped him. She wasn't ready to open up. He'd sense her fear of being judged or drawing attention to her situation. He decided not to press further. You're doing good work, he said instead. If you ever need anything, you can talk to me or HR. We're here to help. She nodded politely, but didn't say much. She was too used to surviving on her own. People who carry heavy responsibilities often learn to hide everything to avoid pity, questions, or trouble. As he walked away, he overheard two workers whispering politely about her. Not in a rude way, more in a concerned tone. She takes every shift she can. I heard she barely eats during breaks. I doesn't even take the bus home sometimes. I saw her walking once. Walking that area at night?
Yeah.
I think she's struggling, but doesn't want anyone to know. The CEO slowed his steps. Their words confirmed what he had already guessed, but it still hurt to hear. It meant she wasn't just trying to survive. She was hiding how bad things really were. He spent the rest of the day working, but kept glancing toward the warehouse through his office window. He saw her moving from one station to another, doing each task with quiet determination. She never complained. She never slowed down unless her body forced her to. At one point, she leaned against a shelf for a few seconds, breathing heavily before pushing herself to keep going. When the end of the first shift came, she didn't leave. She simply stepped aside, washed her hands, and returned to the floor for the second shift. Watching her do that made the CEO feel a mixture of frustration and sadness. No one should live like that. He spent a few minutes in his office thinking of ways to help her without embarrassing her or making her feel exposed. He could speak to HR, but without her consent, they could do little. He could offer assistance, but she might refuse if she felt it came with strings attached. That left him only one option to understand her situation better. Quietly, respectfully. When the second shift finally ended and she stepped outside, the night air looked even colder. She hugged herself lightly and headed toward the bus stop again. The CEO followed. Just as he had the night before. The bus arrived late, almost 20 minutes behind schedule. She didn't rest or sit down while waiting. She simply stood under the flickering streetlight, rubbing her hands together. When she boarded the bus, he followed in his car. He watched the same route, the same stops, the same long ride back toward the older neighborhood, but tonight, something different happened. When she stepped off the bus, she checked her phone, then began to walk faster than usual. She looked worried, almost afraid. Her bag bounced slightly against her hip as she hurried down the uneven pavement. The CEO felt his chest tighten. Something wasn't right. A few minutes later, she reached the same building and rushed inside. A moment after she disappeared through the door, a small flicker of movement flashed through the second-floor window. Then he heard it. A faint cry, not a loud scream, just a child's cry, soft and scared. The door upstairs opened. In a warm but worried voice, Hearst called out, "It's okay, I'm here." The crying softened. He closed his eyes for a moment. Now he understood why she ran. She wasn't late because she was careless. She was late because she didn't want the children to be scared. She didn't want them to feel alone. She wasn't just a worker. She was the only adult those kids had to depend on. For a while, he sat quietly in the car, staring at the building. He didn't try to see more. He didn't want to invade their privacy. But he had seen enough to know something had to change. This wasn't a situation where he could simply say a kind word or offer casual help. This was deeper. This was someone fighting for her life and the lives of children who had no one else. The CEO turned to his driver. "Let's go back." As they drove away, he made a silent promise. Tomorrow, he would start taking real action. He didn't know exactly how yet. But he knew he couldn't let her continue suffering in silence. She deserved support, a safe place, and a chance to breathe without fear of everything collapsing. But above all, the children deserve stability, warmth, and a future. He stared out the car window, watching the city lights blur past. Tomorrow, everything would begin to change. The next morning, the CEO arrived at the office much earlier than usual. He felt strangely restless, as if something inside him had shifted during the night. It wasn't just concern anymore, it was responsibility. He had seen enough to know the young woman was fighting a battle far bigger than the work she did for the company. It bothered him deeply that someone under his leadership had been pushed to such limits without anyone noticing. He sat at his desk, staring at a blank page in his notebook. He wanted to help, but he had to do it the right way. Some people shut down when they felt exposed or pitied. She seemed like the type who carried everything quietly and preferred that no one knew how much she struggled. If he stepped in the wrong way, she might pull away even more. He slowly wrote a few notes. Ideas. Possible solutions. He wasn't planning to play the role of a savior. He just wanted to make sure she had choices. Real choices. So, she didn't have to live on the edge every single day. Later that day, he walked down to the warehouse floor. The workers moved around in their usual rhythm, each one focused on their tasks. Some greeted him politely. Others simply nodded. He scanned the room until he found her. She was lifting boxes again, moving slowly but with the same steady determination as always. He noticed she winced slightly when she bent down. Maybe her back hurt from the long hours? Maybe she hadn't slept enough. Maybe both. He approached her carefully, not wanting to startle her. When she looked up, he could see the dark circles under her eyes. She forced a small smile. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," he replied. "How are you holding up today?" She hesitated. "I'm all right." He didn't believe that, but he didn't push her. "Do you have a few minutes to talk after your shift?" Her eyes widened a little, not fear, but uncertainty. "Is everything okay?" "It's nothing bad," he assured gently. "I just want to discuss something that might help you. Only if you're comfortable." She nodded slowly. "All right. Meet me in the small meeting room near the break area," he said. "No rush. Whenever you're free." She nodded again and went back to her work. But he noticed her shoulders were tense. She probably wondered why someone as high-ranking as him wanted to talk to her. For the rest of the shift, she looked distracted. She fumbled with a few items and dropped a small tool. She apologized repeatedly to her supervisor, who told her it was fine. The CEO watched from a distance, feeling guilty for adding to her stress, but he reminded himself that his intentions were good. He wasn't going to accuse her or question her life. He only wanted to lighten the weight she carried. When her first shift ended, she walked slowly toward the meeting room. Her steps were hesitant, like someone approaching a difficult conversation. She stopped at the door and took a breath before knocking lightly. "Come in," the CEO called. She stepped inside, clutching her bag. She sat gently across from him, her posture cautious. "I want you to know," he began, "this isn't about your performance. You're doing excellent work. Everyone notices it." She lowered her eyes. "Thank you. You've been working double shifts for a long time now," he continued. "That's not easy." "It shows how hardworking you are," she nodded, but stayed quiet. He folded his hands, choosing his words carefully. "I want to understand if there's anything we can do to support you better. If you're facing challenges, maybe the company can help." Her breath caught slightly. She looked down at her hands. "I'm okay. I just like working." I could tell she was afraid to open up. Maybe she worried that if she said too much, she would lose her job. Maybe she had been judged in the past. Many people who carry heavy burdens learn to hide them because they've been hurt before. You don't have to share anything you're uncomfortable with, he added gently. "I'm not asking you to explain your personal life. I just want you to know that help exists if you ever want it." She bit her lip, struggling. Her fingers squeezed the strap of her bag. For a long moment, she stayed silent. He wondered if he had pushed too soon. Then she finally spoke, her voice shaky. "It's not that I don't want help. It's just, I don't know how to ask without feeling like a burden." Her honesty hit him harder than he expected. "You're not a burden," he said firmly. "No one is a burden for needing support." She looked up slightly, her eyes filled with a tired sadness. "Sometimes it feels like that." He waited patiently. She seemed to be choosing her words carefully. "I live with 2 kids," she said finally. "My sister passed away last year. I'm the only one who can take care of them. They're young. Too young to be alone at night. But I also need to work because everything is expensive. The rent, the bills, the school supplies, everything." Her voice trembled. She swallowed hard. "I try to manage," she continued. "I do double shifts because it's the only way to cover everything. And I take the leftover food because I'd rather save money for the kids. They need things more than I do." He listened quietly, letting her speak without interrupting. "I don't want anyone to worry about me," she whispered. "Everyone else has their own problems. I just do what I have to do." He felt a heavy weight in his chest. Her story was even harder than he had imagined. She wasn't just exhausted. She was surviving each day, moment by moment. "Thank you for trusting me with that," he said softly. "I know it wasn't easy." She wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cry." "You don't have to apologize," he said gently. "You're carrying too much alone. Anyone would feel overwhelmed." She nodded but didn't lift her head. He took a breath. "I want to offer you something. You're not required to accept it. It's completely your choice." She looked up, surprised. "I want to move you to a better position," he said. "A daytime role with slightly higher pay. You won't need double shifts, and it will give you more predictable hours." Her eyes widened. "But why me?" "Because you've earned it," he replied. "Because you're hardworking, responsible, and because no one should work themselves into the ground just to survive." She stared at him, processing everything. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything now. Just think about it," he said. "The offer is open. No pressure." She nodded slowly, still overwhelmed. He continued. "There's also a community support program the company partners with. They can help with childcare, school supplies, even emergency groceries if needed. It's private, discreet." Her lips parted, surprised again. "I didn't know." "Most people don't," he admitted. "That's why I'm telling you personally." She sat quietly for a long time. The room felt heavy, but in a gentle way, like something difficult was finally being shared after months of silence. "Thank you," she whispered. "Really, you're welcome," he said sincerely. "You deserve a chance to breathe." She stood slowly, holding her bag. "I'll think about it. I promise." "Take your time," he replied. She walked out of the meeting room with slower steps this time. Not heavy ones, more thoughtful, as if a new possibility had entered her mind. But he noticed something else. She looked scared. Not scared of him, but scared of change. People who have survived on survival mode for a long time often fear that good things might disappear. She'd probably worried that something might go wrong if she accepted help, that she might lose control, that trusting someone could backfire. Still, she had opened up more than he expected. That meant she wanted help, even if she didn't know how to accept it fully. Later in the afternoon, he saw her glance toward his office window while she worked. She didn't hold eye contact long, but it was enough to show she was thinking about their conversation. As her shift ended and she prepared for her second shift, she paused for a moment near the break area. She stared at her reflection in the vending machine glass, breathing slowly. She looked like she was debating something intense inside her mind. Then she surprised him. She walked back to the meeting room and knocked softly on the open door. "Sir," she said. He looked up instantly. "Yes." She swallowed, gathering courage. "If the offer is still available, I'd like to try it. I'm scared to change things, but I know I can't keep doing double shifts forever." He smiled gently. "I'm glad. I'll take care of the arrangements." She nodded, looking relieved and anxious at the same time. "Thank you." That evening, she didn't take the bus home immediately. She stopped by the cafeteria to pick up leftover meals again, but her steps were less rushed. She seemed lighter, as if a small part of the burden she carried had finally been lifted. The CEO followed at a respectful distance again.
Ow.
But now it felt different. He wasn't just watching out of concern. He was watching with hope that her life would soon start changing. When she reached her building and stepped inside, the same little voices greeted her with excitement. But this time he heard her voice too lighter, softer, not weighed down in the same way. "I have something to tell you both," she said warmly. "Things might get better soon." The children cheered happily, and she laughed quietly for the first time. The CEO felt like things were moving in the right direction. Tomorrow, he would take the next steps, and soon. She would no longer have to fight alone. The drive to her neighborhood stayed with him long after he reached home that night. Even after he changed into comfortable clothes and tried to relax on the couch, the pictures in his mind refused to fade. He could still see the small house that seemed to bend under its own weight. The broken steps, the dim light flickering from the small window, and the tired woman who walked inside as if she had been carrying the whole world on her shoulders. He lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and wondering how someone who worked so hard could still struggle so much. He thought about all the times he had walked past employees without truly seeing them. He thought about meetings where he had listened to reports about productivity, overtime, and labor costs, yet never asked himself what those numbers meant for the people behind them. It was as if a curtain had been pulled back. Now he felt ashamed that he had ignored so much for so long. By morning, he felt drained but determined. He had spent the whole night thinking about her situation. And one thing became clear. He couldn't go back to pretending everything was fine. He couldn't move forward as the same version of himself who looked at the company only through charts and profits. It was time to step into the world his workers lived in every day. The world he had never bothered to understand. He reached the office before sunrise, even earlier than the previous day. The building was quiet, lights still off in most rooms. He walked through the empty halls, taking a slow breath as he stepped inside his office. The familiar space felt different now. The large desk, the soft chair, the polished windows, they all seemed out of place when he remembered the cold, cramped house he had seen last night. He sat down and opened his laptop, ready to search for whatever help he could offer. But after a few minutes, he closed it again. Helping her wasn't as simple as writing a check or offering a promotion. Money could solve some problems, but not the deeper ones. There were reasons she was working double shifts. There were reasons she didn't ask for help except for that single night when hunger pushed her to speak. He needed to understand those reasons first, so he made a decision. He would go back to the factory not for a visit, not for a tour, not as a boss arriving with security and managers crowding behind him. He would go alone, without anyone knowing. He wanted to talk to the workers themselves, learn what their days looked like, and understand what had pushed someone so hardworking into such a difficult corner. When he arrived at the factory floor, the day shift was just beginning. Workers clocked in, rubbing their tired eyes, pulling on gloves, and stretching stiff backs. He recognized some faces he had seen the night before, though none of them recognized him. Without his formal suit, without the usual crowd around him, he'd looked like any other visitor. He stood in a corner, quietly observing. The young woman from last night wasn't there yet. Her shift started later in the afternoon, but he noticed other workers moving slowly, dragging heavy carts, lifting boxes that seemed far too heavy for one person. Their eyes carried the same exhaustion he had seen in hers. He watched one man struggle to lift a box off a conveyor belt. His hands shook and he had to pause halfway to catch his breath. A supervisor walked past him, glanced his way, then kept moving without saying anything. It took everything in the CEO to stop himself from stepping in. But he reminded himself of why he was there to learn, not to interrupt. After a few minutes, he walked over to a small break area where a group of workers sat around a metal table, eating cheap snacks and talking quietly. He approached them carefully, unsure how to start. One of them looked up, confused. "Can we help you?" the worker asked politely. He hesitated, then nodded. I wanted to ask about your work here. How long have you been at the factory?" The workers exchanged a quick look, surprised by the question. But then, one of them, an older man with kind eyes and a tired smile, answered. "A long time," he said. "Too long, maybe? But you know how it is. Work is work." CEO nodded, taking a seat at the edge of the table after they motioned for him to join. He listened as they talked about long shifts, small breaks, tight deadlines. and managers who were stretched too thin to help even if they wanted to. They didn't complain with anger. They spoke with acceptance, as if this was simply life. Hearing their honest words made his chest tighten. He asked gently, "Do many workers take double shifts?" Again, they exchanged glances. "More than you'd think," one woman replied. "Some of us have families to support. Rent goes up, kids need school supplies. Sometimes you don't have a choice." He swallowed, thinking of the young woman's thin jacket, her shaky hands, and the lonely way she walked home. "Do people help each other?" he asked. The older man nodded. "We try. But everyone has their own struggles. That girl, the one who works evenings and nights, she barely sleeps. Never complains, though. She keeps going because she has someone at home who needs her." The CEO's heart dropped. "Someone at home?" The man nodded again. "She never tells us much, but we know she's supporting someone. Maybe a sick parent or a child. She never spends money on herself. Always tired, always quiet." The CEO sat still, absorbing the quiet truth hidden in those words. He wanted to ask more, but felt that pushing too much would draw suspicion. So he thanked them, stood up, and stepped away. For the next few hours, he continued observing the factory. He watched the machines, the workers, the routines, everything that made the place run. And the more he saw, the clearer the problem became. People were the backbone of the company. Yet he had let policies turn them into numbers. No one should have been struggling alone. No one should have been forced to choose between sleep and survival. No one should have been so hungry that they had to ask their boss for food by noon. He left the factory with a heavy heart, but a clear plan forming in his mind. He returned to his office and requested every report connected to worker condition salaries. Overtime, break schedules, staffing, training. His secretary looked at him with wide eyes when he made the request, but she didn't question him. He spent the entire afternoon reading. Every page made him more uneasy. There were gaps, big ones. Workers had been pushed to take double shifts because the company had cut hiring costs the previous year. Break times were short because production demands had increased. Overtime pay was low because of an old policy that no one had bothered to revise. And yet, the company had been growing steadily, profits rising each quarter. He sat back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. He had allowed all of this. Not directly, but by not paying attention, not asking questions, not walking through the spaces where his employees lived their daily lives. He had accepted the polished reports without asking. What they hid behind clean charts and tidy summaries, his thoughts kept. Drifting back to the young woman, the way her hands trembled while eating the meal he gave her, the way she apologized even when she had done nothing wrong, the way she walked into that dark house with no energy left. She deserved better. All of them did. As the day ended and the sun dipped behind the buildings outside his window, he prepared himself for what he needed to do next. It wouldn't be simple. Changing an entire system never was. But he wasn't afraid anymore. He felt a strange sense of responsibility, heavy but right. He left the office late, walking outside into the cool night air. For the first time in years, he took a slow walk instead of heading straight for his car. The silence of the street gave him space to think. He imagined the young woman returning home from another long shift, perhaps too tired to cook, perhaps worrying about the person waiting for her inside. The thought pushed him forward. He reached his car, opened the door, then paused. His phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from the head of human resources reminding him about a scheduled meeting the next morning. A meeting about cost reduction. He stared at the message, then closed it without replying. Tomorrow would not be about cutting costs. Tomorrow would be about rebuilding. He got into his car, took a deep breath, and held it for a moment before starting the engine. The city lights blurred past as he drove, but his mind stayed locked on one thought. He had seen enough to know that his company needed to change, starting with the person whose life had opened his eyes, and he was going to help her. No matter how difficult it became, he owed her that much, and maybe, just maybe. He owed it to himself, too. The next morning arrived with a heavy sky, the kind that looked like it might rain but couldn't decide if it should. The CEO woke up earlier than usual again, but this time he didn't feel restless. He felt steady, focused, and strangely calm. The decision he had been carrying in his mind all night was now firm. Today was the day he would stop watching from the sidelines and start acting. He reached the office before most of the staff arrived. A few people greeted him politely as he walked past, unaware of the storm of change he was bringing with him. He didn't go straight to his office like he usually did. Instead, he made his way to the conference room, where he had asked several department heads to meet him. Human resources, operations, finance, production. They were all about to hear things they probably weren't expecting, one by one. They arrived, taking their seats around the long table. They talked softly among themselves, wondering why the meeting had been scheduled so suddenly. When he finally stepped into the room, the conversation stopped. Everyone looked at him, waiting. He stood at the head of the table, took a slow breath, and said, "We need to make some major changes." The room fell silent. He didn't raise his voice, didn't show anger, but his words carried weight. He explained everything he had seen. Tired workers pushing themselves beyond their limits. Unsafe workloads, low pay for long shifts, exhaustion hidden behind forced smiles. He spoke about the young woman working double shifts, though he didn't reveal her identity. He talked about the night he followed her home, and what he saw there, the broken steps, the dim light, and the feeling of quiet struggle that wrapped around the small house like a thick blanket. Some of the managers looked guilty. Others looked surprised. A few looked uncomfortable, as if hearing the truth out loud pierced something inside them. "We cannot run this company like this anymore," he said firmly. "Not when the people who keep it alive are barely keeping themselves alive." The head of finance cleared his throat and hesitantly asked, "Are you suggesting changes to the budget?" "Yes," the CEO answered plainly. "A lot of changes." He outlined everything he wanted to fix. Higher wages for all workers, better overtime policies, proper breaks, healthier working hours, more staff to reduce the pressure on existing employees, safety improvements, and support programs for workers facing hardships at home. Every point he mentioned came from something he had seen or heard in the past 2 days. "But this will increase costs," someone whispered. "It will," he agreed. "But it will also save lives. And it will make this company one we can be proud of, not one built on exhaustion." There was no anger in his voice, no shame, only a deep honesty that made the room quiet again. He ended the meeting by telling them to prepare new plans and policies by the end of the week. Then he dismissed everyone and went back to his office, leaving the managers whispering among themselves. The morning passed quickly as he reviewed paperwork and answered messages. But there was something he needed to do, something important that went beyond meetings and policies. So by early afternoon, he left the building and drove toward the factory again. This time, he wasn't there to follow anyone. He was there to speak to her. Her shift had just begun when he arrived. He saw her walking toward her station, holding a lunchbox that looked old but carefully cleaned. She had tied her hair back, though strands kept falling in front of her face. Her steps were slow, heavier than usual, like her body was still recovering from too many long days. He approached her gently. "Can we talk for a moment?" he asked. She looked startled but nodded politely. Of course. He stepped aside to a quiet corner near the supply shelves. She stood nervously, unsure why the CEO wanted to speak to her again. He could see the worry in her eyes, the fear that she might have done something wrong. "You're not in trouble," he said softly, hoping to calm her. "I just wanted to check on you." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't expect you to come back," he nodded. "I didn't expect most things that happened these past days. But I'm glad I came." There was a pause then. He asked, "How are you doing today?" She hesitated before answering, as if the truth felt too heavy to say out loud. "A little tired," she finally admitted, "but I'm okay. I just need to keep working." "Do you still need to take double shifts?" he asked gently. Her shoulders lowered a little, as if the question touched a place she had tried to hide. "I don't want to," she said quietly, "but I have someone at home who needs care, and things cost money. I can't fall behind." He listened closely, feeling the weight of her words settle inside him. "Are you taking care of a child?" he asked in a soft tone. She shook her head. "No, my younger brother. He's been unwell for a long time. He can't be left alone. I'm the only one who supports him." He had guessed she was caring for someone, but hearing it directly from her made everything feel even more real. "I'm sorry you've been carrying this alone," he said sincerely. "And I'm sorry this company hasn't supported you the way it should." She blinked, surprised to hear those words from someone like him. "It's not your fault," she said quietly. "It's just life." "No," he said. "It is my responsibility, and things are going to change." She looked at him with confusion. "What do you mean?" He took a gentle breath. "The company is going to update its policies. Wages, breaks, overtime, working hours, everything. People won't need to push themselves to the point of exhaustion anymore." Her eyes widened slightly, but she still seemed unsure whether to believe him. "And for you," he continued softly, "I want to make sure you get the help you need. You shouldn't be working double shifts just to survive. You shouldn't have to come here hungry. You shouldn't have to carry everything alone." Her lips trembled, but she stayed silent. "If you're willing," he added, "I'd like to offer you a different position. One with better hours and better pay. You'll still work hard, but you won't break yourself doing it." The shock on her face was clear. A promotion. "Yes," he said, "and support for your home situation as well. We can arrange help for your brother's care. You deserve rest, dignity, and time to breathe." Her eyes filled with tears instantly. She turned her face away, embarrassed, wiping them quickly. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," he replied gently. "Just let us help." She nodded slowly, almost trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know why you're being so kind, but thank you." He didn't tell her that following her home had changed him forever. He didn't tell her that seeing her struggle had opened his eyes to the silent battles workers fought every day. Instead, he offered a small smile and said, "You gave me a chance to see what I should have seen all along." She took a shaky breath and smiled back. A small, soft smile that looked like it hadn't appeared in a long time. For the rest of her shift, she moved differently. She looked lighter, like some invisible weight had lifted. When other workers asked her what was going on, she simply said everything was fine, better than fine. Meanwhile, the CEO spent the day walking through the factory floor. Not as a visitor, but as someone who finally understood what needed to be fixed. Workers looked at him in confusion, wondering why he kept asking questions, why he seemed so interested in their daily routines. None of them knew this was the beginning of something larger. By the end of the week, the new company policies were drafted. News of the changes spread quickly. Higher wages, more staff, safer schedules, better treatment. People didn't know whether to believe it until they saw the official announcement. When they did, the entire factory buzzed with a kind of excitement it hadn't felt in years. Workers who usually kept quiet talked loudly during breaks. People who rarely smiled suddenly had reasons to. Some even cried out of relief, knowing they wouldn't need to wear their bodies down anymore. As for the young woman, she received her new position the following Monday. It came with a proper desk, gentler hours, and a pay rate that finally allowed her to breathe. The first night she came home early, her brother looked at her with confusion. "You're not tired today?" he asked. She smiled, sat beside him, and said, "No, not today, and not anymore." She cooked a proper meal that night, something she hadn't had the time or strength to do for months. They ate together, laughed together, and for the first time in a long time. Their small house didn't feel heavy. Across the city, the CEO sat in his office, looking out the window with a thoughtful expression. He knew the changes weren't perfect yet. He knew he still had much to learn. But he also knew he had taken the first step toward becoming the kind of leader he could respect,